The folder they gave me had my name on a sticky note, just my first name, handwritten, like I was a file they were getting around to. I sat in the chair across from my son-in-law's desk. Not a bank desk, not a lawyer's office, just the big mahogany thing he had shipped from somewhere in North Carolina that he talked about too much. And I looked at that sticky note and thought, 41 years. That's how long I kept this family together, and now I'm a sticky note. My daughter was standing by the window. She didn't sit. That was the first thing I noticed. You sit down when you're having a conversation with someone. You stand when you're delivering something. Mom, she said, we've talked about this. We hadn't actually. She had talked, I had listened. There's a difference, and I'd spent enough years being a kindergarten teacher to know exactly what it looked like when someone confused the two. The folder had papers inside, a quitclaim deed, a transfer of property form, and a check already written out, already signed, for $35,000. My son-in-law leaned back in his chair. He had the look he always got when he thought he was being generous. Chin slightly up, hands folded, a small patient smile like he was waiting for applause. That's a fair number, Cecile, he said. More than fair. The house needs work. The market's uncertain. You'd be taking money off our hands when, frankly, you don't have to. Cecile. He always used my name when he wanted to remind me he was doing me a favor. I looked at the check. $35,000 for a house my husband and I built. Not bought. Built. Warren poured the back porch himself on a June weekend in 1987. I painted every room. The pale yellow in the kitchen took 3 coats because I kept changing my mind about the shade, and Warren never once complained, just went back to the hardware store, just handed me the new can with a look that meant you'll get it right. Warren had been gone for 4 years by then, and somehow, in those 4 years, the house had become a problem to be solved. I need more time, I said. My daughter turned from the window. Mom, we've given you time. The tax situation alone. Whose tax situation? She stopped. Because my taxes are fine, I said. I pay them every April. I've never missed. So whose tax situation are we talking about? The silence lasted about 3 seconds. My son-in-law uncrossed his hands. What I didn't tell them, what I'd been sitting with for 6 weeks, quietly, the way I'd learned to sit with things over 73 years of living, was that I had already spoken to someone. A woman named Patricia Okafor, an estate attorney whose office was on Clement Street, 3rd floor, with a waiting room that smelled like cedar and had a small fountain on the reception desk that I found very calming. I had found her through my friend Renata. No, wait, I need to stop. I had found her through a woman from my book club, someone I'd known for 15 years, who had gone through something similar when her brother tried to push her out of her mother's estate. Patricia had sat with me for 2 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. She had a yellow legal pad, and she used the whole thing. She didn't rush me. She let me explain the house, the history, Warren, the porch, the yellow kitchen, and when I finished, she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "You understand that no one can make you sign anything." I did understand, but I hadn't always felt it. Let me go back a little, because this didn't start with a folder and a mahogany desk. It started 3 years earlier, when my daughter and her husband moved back to the Bay Area after 12 years in Atlanta. I was glad at first. I won't pretend I wasn't. My daughter is my only child, and I missed her in the particular way you miss people who used to be small and are now full-sized and busy. I thought we'd have dinners. Saturday mornings. Maybe she'd come over and we'd go through Warren's record collection together, which I still hadn't been able to do alone. What happened instead was that they bought a house 11 minutes from me, and within 4 months, the conversation started shifting. At first it was gentle. "Mom, have you thought about what you want to do long-term with the house? It's a lot of space for one person." "Fine, reasonable." I thought about it. The house is 4 bedrooms, and I use 2 of them, one to sleep in and one where I keep my sewing machine and my books, and the chair by the window where I read every morning. The other 2 are guest rooms. I like having guest rooms. I like that my grandchildren, when they visit, they're in Phoenix, my daughter's stepchildren from her husband's first marriage, have somewhere to sleep that feels like theirs. Then it became, it's a lot of upkeep for one person. Also true, but I manage. I have a handyman named Earl who comes when I need him and charges me a fair rate and once fixed my furnace at 7 in the morning in December without being asked twice. I have neighbors on both sides who look out for me. I am not struggling with my upkeep. Then, you know the market is strong right now, and if you are ever going to sell, this would be the time. That's when I started paying closer attention. They wanted the house. Not for me, for them. My son-in-law had mentioned twice, in that careful sideways way he mentioned things he actually wanted directly, that the neighborhood had investment potential. He used the phrase legacy asset. He said it the way you say something you've been practicing. My daughter, I think, believed she was helping. I want to be careful here because she is still my daughter, and I love her, and I know she came from a good place, or at least a place that had good mixed into it. But love and helping are not the same thing as consent. And no one had asked me what I wanted. What I wanted was to stay in my house, in the yellow kitchen, with the porch Warren built, where I drink my coffee every morning when the weather allows and watch the birds at the feeder he put up the spring before he got sick. That's what I wanted. But when I said it, plainly and clearly, my daughter would get a particular expression, not angry, just pained, like I was being unreasonable, and my son-in-law would pivot to the tax situation, or the market, or the upkeep, and we would go around the circle again. After the second formal conversation, they had started calling them family discussions, which I found remarkable given that no one was asking for my input. I made an appointment with Patricia Okafor. I didn't tell my daughter, not because I was hiding anything, but because I had learned, very late in life, that you don't need to narrate every step of protecting yourself to the people you're protecting yourself from. Warren taught me that, actually. He was a quiet man who thought before he spoke, and he used to say that the most important decisions happen in the space before you open your mouth. Patricia confirmed what I already knew, but needed to hear from someone with a law degree. The house was mine outright, paid off, in my name alone since Warren's passing. No one could force a sale. No one could transfer ownership without my signature. And if I chose to, there were structures that would make the process of that choice much cleaner, much more protected, and much harder to revisit after the fact. We talked about a revocable living trust. We talked about what it would mean for the property to pass directly, cleanly, without going to probate. We talked about what my actual wishes were for the house, who I wanted to have it, under what conditions, what Warren would have wanted. And it was the first time in 3 years that anyone had asked me that question. I cried a little in Patricia's office. She handed me a box of tissues without making it a moment. That was good. I didn't want it to be a moment. I just needed to cry for a minute about Warren and the porch and the yellow paint, and then I needed to get on with it. It took 6 weeks. Patricia and her paralegal were thorough. We did it right. By the time I sat down across from my son-in-law's mahogany desk and looked at that $35,000 check, I had already signed other papers. Much more important papers. Papers that meant the house had a future I had chosen, not one that had been chosen for me. Back in the study, my son-in-law was explaining the tax situation again. I let him finish. He had a way of going on that I had never found a polite way to interrupt, so I had learned to simply wait. When he finished, I said, "I'm not signing the deed." My daughter looked at me. "I appreciate that you think this is a fair offer," I said, "but the house isn't for sale, Mom." "I've had the property reviewed by an estate attorney," I said. "Everything is in order. I've established a revocable living trust, which means the property and its disposition are already handled. You don't need to worry about the tax situation, because it's been structured properly." My son-in-law's expression did something complicated. The patient smile stayed, but something behind it shifted. He reached forward slightly, like he was going to pick up the folder, then didn't. "A trust," he said. "Yes." "When did you—" "6 weeks ago," I said. "I've also updated my advance healthcare directive and durable power of attorney, if those were concerns." They weren't concerns. That wasn't what this had been about. But I said it anyway because I wanted him to understand that I had been thorough. My daughter was very still by the window. "Mom," she said finally, "I wish you'd talk to us first. I wish you'd asked me what I wanted before you wrote out a check," I said. She flinched. I hadn't meant it to be cruel, but I hadn't not meant it either. There's an honesty that lives on the other side of being polite for too long, and I had been polite for 3 years. I want to say something about my daughter here, because this story isn't really about the house or the trust or even the $35,000 check. It's about what happens to women like me, women who spent their whole lives in service of something or someone, quietly and without keeping score. When the people they love most start seeing that service as evidence of helplessness. I taught kindergarten for 31 years. I raised my daughter largely alone for the first 7 before I met Warren, working 2 jobs and still making her Halloween costumes by hand, because I had promised myself she would have the things I hadn't. I kept Warren's medical records organized across 4 specialists and 2 hospitals during the last 18 months of his illness, never missing an appointment, never losing a document. I handled the estate, the accounts, the decisions that needed to be made when you lose the person you built everything with. I am not helpless. I have never been helpless. What I was for a while was tired, and tired can look like helpless if you're watching from a distance and you're already planning around it. My son-in-law had been watching from a distance. My daughter had been too, though I think she told herself it was closeness. They didn't speak to me for about 3 weeks after the study conversation. My daughter sent a few texts, short, factual, about a prescription refill she was handling for me, and a dentist appointment I had mentioned. Nothing about the house. Nothing about the folder. I wasn't waiting for something to break. I was just living. I had my book club on Thursdays. I had Earl over to fix the gate latch that had been sticking since October. I had a very good week where I went through 4 of Warren's record albums, just as myself, in the living room, and cried the right amount and felt better afterward. My grandchildren called on a Sunday. The older one, who is 12, calls me sometimes just to talk, which I think is a miracle of modern children. We talked for 40 minutes about a book she was reading and a boy in her class who she described as annoying in an interesting way, and I did not tell her what that probably meant because 12 is too young, and also she'll figure it out. I felt, those 3 weeks, more like myself than I had in a long time. Then my daughter came over. Alone, without calling first. Which is how I knew it mattered. She knocked, which she almost never does. She has a key, has had one for years, and I let her in and made tea and we sat at the kitchen table in the pale yellow room. She looked tired. She had her father's eyes, Warren's eyes, the blue-gray color that goes darker when something's weighing on them. I didn't know you were unhappy, she said. I wasn't unhappy, I said. I was dismissed. She turned her mug in her hands. I thought I was helping, she said. I know. I thought. She stopped. Started again. He kept saying it was the practical thing, that it was better to handle it now. Before I couldn't, I said. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I'm 73, I said. Not 93. I can still handle things. I handled them quite well, actually. A small sound came out of her then, somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't. Yeah, she said, you really did. We didn't solve everything that afternoon. You don't solve 40-some years of a mother-daughter relationship over chamomile tea on a Tuesday, and I wouldn't have trusted it if we had. But we talked for 2 hours. Real talking, the back-and-forth kind. She told me things she'd been carrying about that period after Warren died, fear she'd had for me that she hadn't known how to say, except sideways, through her husband, through practicality, through the folder with my name on a sticky note. And I told her what I should have told her sooner, that I needed her to ask before she decided. That being cared about and being consulted are different things, and I needed both. She cried. I didn't, that time. I'd already done my crying in Patricia's office, and with Warren's record albums, and there was something clarifying about being on the dry side of it for once. Before she left, she stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked around at the yellow walls. I always loved this kitchen, she said. I know, I said. Me too. My son-in-law came to apologize about 2 weeks later. I'll give him credit, he did it properly, in person, without making it about himself more than 3 or 4 times, which for him was restrained. He said he'd been thinking about the situation as a financial problem, when it wasn't a financial problem. He said he understood that it was my house, my decision, and that he'd gotten ahead of himself. He used the word overstepped without being prompted, which I thought was actually quite good. I thanked him and meant it. Apologies don't undo things, but they're not nothing. The check, I noticed, was not mentioned. I assumed it had been voided, and I didn't ask. Some things don't need to be discussed to be understood. The porch needs repainting this summer. I've been looking at colors. I'm thinking about going slightly warmer than the white we had. Maybe a very pale gray with just enough warmth in it that it looks good in the afternoon light. Earl thinks I'm overthinking it. He's probably right. The bird feeder Warren put up needs a new base. Squirrels got to it last fall. I found the same model online, the one he had, and ordered it. It came last week, and I've been meaning to ask Earl to set it up, but I might do it myself. Warren built the porch, but I helped. I remember where the level is. I have my morning still. Coffee on the porch, when the weather allows, and it's been good lately. The kind of California spring that makes you understand why people live here. The finches are back. They come every year around this time, and they are not impressed with me, but they tolerate my presence. And at 73, I find that I have made my peace with being merely tolerated by small birds. The trust is in place. Patricia sends me updates when anything requires attention. My daughter calls twice a week now, real calls, the kind where we talk about things that aren't practical problems. She came over last Saturday, and we went through 4 more of Warren's albums together, and she cried when we got to the one they played at our wedding, which I expected, and then she laughed because I made a joke about the second side, which I hadn't expected, but was grateful for. The house is quiet in the evenings, the way houses are when one person lives in them, and that person has made peace with the sound of their own life. I used to find the quiet hard. For about a year after Warren, it felt like a missing thing, an absence with weight to it. Now, it just feels like mine. The sticky note is gone, of course. I think about it sometimes. My name, written in someone else's handwriting, on the outside of a folder meant to transfer my own life. I think about how close I came to sitting in that chair and saying nothing, which is what I would have done once. What I trained myself to do over years of keeping the peace and smoothing things over and deciding that other people's comfort was worth more than my clarity. I didn't do that. I had, for once, done the thing before the moment required it, made the calls, asked the questions, signed the papers that mattered. I had walked into that room already finished, already decided, already whole, and all I had to do was sit there and be exactly who I'd always been, which turned out to be more than enough. Warren would have loved that. He would have said something quiet and exactly right, the way he always did, and then he would have gone back to whatever he was reading, and I would have known from the way he said it that I had done well. I think about that on the porch in the mornings. The birds come and go. The coffee gets cold before I finish it, which has always been a habit of mine that Warren pretended to find annoying and actually found endearing. He told me that once, near the end, in the way you tell people things near the end, when you've run out of reasons to wait. I let the coffee go cold. I watched the yard. I am still here, in this house, in this life, in this yellow kitchen that took 3 coats to get right. I am still here, and the house is still mine. I've thought a lot about why it took me so long to act, not to feel I felt everything clearly. Probably from the second conversation, when I realized no one in that room was asking what I wanted. But feeling something and doing something about it are separated by a distance that's different for every person. And for me, that distance had been built up over a lifetime of deciding that keeping the peace was the same as being good. It isn't. I know that now in a way I didn't before. What my son-in-law was doing wasn't malicious, in the way a stranger's cruelty is malicious. He genuinely believed, I think, that he was being practical, that $35,000 was a reasonable solution to a problem he had defined without consulting me. And that's the thing about this kind of situation. The harm isn't always in the intent. It's in the assumption that because I was 73 and living alone and sometimes left my coffee to go cold, I had become a problem to be managed rather than a person to be asked. What I did, calling Patricia, spending those 6 weeks getting everything in order before I walked into that room, wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. I didn't do it to humiliate anyone or to win something. I did it because I finally understood that protecting yourself is not the same as being difficult. It's just being responsible for your own life, which is something I'd taught kindergartners for 31 years and somehow had to relearn for myself at 73. The consequences followed naturally from the choices on all sides. My son-in-law made assumptions and moved too fast, and the result was that he had no leverage when it mattered. I stayed quiet too long, and the result was 3 years of circular conversations that wore me down and made me feel smaller than I was. When I finally acted, quietly, thoroughly, without announcing it, the result was that I walked into that room already whole, and nothing that happened there could take that from me. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the trust documents or the check that never got signed. It's the feeling of having done the work before the moment required it, of not needing the conversation to go a certain way because the important things were already handled. Warren was like that. He used to say that the best preparation is the kind nobody sees until it matters. I didn't fully understand what he meant until I was sitting across from a mahogany desk with a folder on it that had my name on a sticky note, and I felt nothing. Not fear, not anger, just clarity. That clarity came from the 6 weeks I spent with Patricia, yes, but it also came from every hard thing I had ever handled and not fallen apart over. Every year of teaching, of raising my daughter, of managing Warren's illness, of learning to live in a house that was too quiet after he was gone. None of that was wasted. All of it was practice for knowing, in that moment, exactly who I was. My daughter and I are still working things out. That's honest. Trust is rebuilt in small moments, not big ones. A real phone call, a Saturday afternoon, 4 albums, and some tears and a laugh about the second side. I'm not in a hurry. Some things take the time they take. But the house is mine, the porch is mine, the yellow kitchen is mine, and I am still completely myself.